This is the story of the Nutcracker. It all happened many years ago in a small town in Germany. For weeks, the stall-bound children, Fritz and Clara, had been counting the days until Christmas Eve. It was the custom in their family to decorate the tree and give out gifts the night before Christmas. All their friends would come to celebrate with them, and there would be music and dancing and wonderful things to eat. For weeks before the big night, the children could not talk about anything else. Finally, the long-awaited night arrived. It was a cool and frosty evening, and the snowflakes swirled through the air as Clara opened the window to look out. As she leaned out the window a little, she could see some people with lanterns coming down the street. And behind them, she could see another group approaching. All of them were coming to the Stallbaum's house. Soon the wonderful Christmas party would begin. Hello, Marie. Hello, Carl. Greta. John. Come in, come in. We've been waiting hours for you. We're so glad you're here. We are going to have a wonderful time tonight, said the children as their friends came into the house. We may not go into the living room, for the grown-ups are still decorating the tree, said Clara. Perhaps we can peep through the door, suggested one of their friends. No, we must not do that. It would spoil the surprise. Do you think the tree will be as beautiful as it was last year? Asked Clara's best friend, Gretel. Oh, it's sure to be even more splendid. Mommy has gotten many new ornaments to hang on it, replied Clara. I peeked into the boxes the other day. The group of children impatiently waited outside the closed parlor doors while the adults put the final decorations on the Christmas tree. Fritz, said Clara to her brother, what gifts do you think we will get tonight? It's sure to be something wonderful, said Fritz. Dr. Drosselmeyer is coming, and you know he has made special toys for us. Of course, said Clara. His gifts are always the best. Indeed they were, for Dr. Drosselmeyer, the children's godfather, was no ordinary man. He was a remarkable inventor who could make lifelike puppets that walked and danced. Last Christmas, he had brought the children a toy castle on a hill above a moat, with guards that marched up and down, and a puppet king and a queen. Father had had a special glass cupboard built to hold Dr. Drosselmeyer's gifts and to keep them safe behind glass doors that locked. At last the parlor doors were opened, and the children rushed into the room. There, in the corner of the room, stood a splendid Christmas tree, aglow with candles and sparkling ornaments. Oh, how beautiful! It's even better than last year's tree, the children said as they ran over to look at the tin trumpets and whistles and glass balls and star-shaped cookies and little toy people made of candy and sugar, all hanging on the tree. At the bottom of the tree were piles and piles of brightly colored packages decorated with ribbons and fancy bows. Can we open the gifts now, please? Begged the excited children. Clara's father clapped his hands and said, Everybody, gather around, for that special time is here now. Then he picked up packages one by one and started handing out the gifts to the excited children. Fritz eagerly tore the wrappings off his large package. Oh, great, he said. A wooden horse! How did you know? It's just what I wanted most. And he happily mounted the horse and pretended to be a soldier off riding to war. His mother smiled, for Fritz had said so many times all year long how much he wished he had a wooden horse. For Clara, there was a doll with large blue eyes and blonde curls, wearing a dainty blue dress. She hugged the doll and spun around, kissing its soft hair. I shall call you Marie, she whispered to her doll, and I will take very good care of you. For although she sometimes thought she was growing a little old for dolls, She still loved to play with them. After all the gifts were opened, Clara's father clapped his hands again and said, "Put the gifts away for now, because it's time for dancing." And the lively music started, and round and back and forth, everybody danced and danced in front of the Christmas tree. In the midst of the merriment, the tinkling of the doorbell sounded, and Fritz turned to his sister. "Clara, that must be Godfather Drosselmeyer. He always comes late. Now we will find out what he has brought us this year." Godfather Drosselmeyer arrived, looking odd and mysterious as ever. He was a tall, thin man with long silver hair, dressed entirely in black, with a dark patch over one eye. He was strange-looking, in fact, a little frightening, but the children knew he was wise and clever. Following him were his servants carrying two oddly shaped packages. Clara stared. Could they possibly be what they looked like? "Why, Godfather," said Clara, "can it be that your servants are bringing in a huge cabbage and pie? Whatever shall we do with them? Nobody could eat all that cabbage and pie, and I don't really think anybody will want to now with all the good things here to eat." Clara felt rather disappointed, for Godfather's gifts were usually the most exciting part of Christmas, and she could not feel too happy about a giant cabbage and pie.
"Don't worry. You will like this, Clara,"
said Drosselmeyer as he raised his arms high above his head. Out of the cabbage stepped a lovely mechanical doll, tall and willowy and graceful, and out of the pie, a handsome toy soldier. Father Drosselmeyer wound up their springs, and as the children gazed in amazement, they seemed to come alive. They rose and bowed to the audience, and then to each other, and did a most graceful and charming dance on and on until the springs wound down. Everyone asked to have them wound up again and do their dance again. When they had finished the second time and vanished into their covers, Godfather Drosselmeyer came over and kissed both Clara and Fritz.
"I have made these specially for you to wish you a happy Christmas."
"Oh, Godfather Drosselmeyer, thank you, thank you. They are even more beautiful than last year's toys. They look so real and dance so gracefully. We will take good care of them." As she skipped away from Godfather Drosselmeyer, Clara noticed something lying on the floor under the tree. What could that funny little toy be? Clara went forward to look more closely. It was a strange-looking little man with thin, short legs and a large head that was too big for his body. His big, round blue eyes had such a sweet expression, Clara fell in love with him at first sight. "Papa," she said, "who is this little man sitting under the tree?" "Oh, Clara, this little fellow is a Nutcracker man," said Clara's father. "Do see what he can do." And he popped a nut into the little man's mouth and pulled down his wooden cape. The little man's mouth opened wide and then closed down on the nut. Knack, knack, out came a neatly cracked nutshell and a whole nut kernel. "I like him very much, Father," said Clara. "He has such a sweet little face, but he does look so sad." "Since you are so fond of him, Clara," said her father, "he shall be yours. Take good care of him." And he handed the little man to Clara. Delighted, she gave the Nutcracker a hug and had him crack some more nuts, making sure she picked out small ones so that he would not hurt himself. "But I want to play with him too," said Fritz, and he chased Clara round and round the room until he finally caught her and snatched the little Nutcracker man away. "He's really an ugly little fellow," said Fritz, and he crammed the biggest and hardest walnuts he could find into the poor fellow's mouth until finally, crack, crack, poor Nutcracker, 3 teeth fell out of his mouth, and his lower jaw wobbled. Clara snatched the Nutcracker away from Fritz. "Now see what you've done. You've hurt him, poor little fellow." And she tenderly bound up his jaw with a ribbon. "What good is he?" cried Fritz. "He calls himself a Nutcracker, and he can't even crack a large nut." "Just leave him alone," said Clara. Then she went to the toy cupboard and took a doll's bed out. She turned back the coverlet and smoothed out the pillow. It was just the right size for Nutcracker. Gently, she made the Nutcracker man comfortable in the bed.
"Good night, Mr. Nutcracker," she whispered. "I will see that your teeth and jaw get fixed. You will be as good as new."
Now the guests had finished eating the ices and fancy cakes, and people were starting to put on their coats and scarves. The warm room and the rich food and the dancing had made everybody tired, and the night was getting late. The party was over, and it was time to go.
"Goodbye, goodbye. It was a wonderful party.
"The best ever."
We had such a good time.
"Thank you." And the guests gradually left laughing and chatting in the cold, snowy night. The last to leave was Godfather Drosselmeyer, covered in an immense fur coat with cloth buttons and yards of black braid.
"You have made me feel young again tonight. Truly, it was a wonderful evening."
And as he stepped out, the snowstorm swirled down around him, and he seemed to vanish in it. "Please, Mother, may I stay up just a few more minutes?" said Clara, who wanted to look at the glistening Christmas tree just a little bit more. "Yes, darling," said her mother, "but do come up to bed in a few minutes." And she kissed Clara good night and went up with Fritz and his father. Clara bent over the Nutcracker in his little bed. "Poor little Nutcracker. Dr. Drosselmeyer will be able to fix your teeth and jaw. We will ask him tomorrow." As she said the name, Drosselmeyer, Nutcracker seemed to come to life, and he stared at her. She was sure he had made a horrible face. Clara felt frightened, but then she thought, "Oh, how silly I am. He's only a doll. He cannot come alive." She started to leave when... What were those strange noises? Such a rustling and whispering coming from every side of the room. They seemed to be in the walls. Perhaps it was the little mice that lived in the walls of the Stahlbaum house. Crunch, crunch. She'd never heard the sound so loud. Just then, the grandfather clock started whirring and wheezing as it prepared to strike the hour. Clara glanced at the clock. What a surprise! The gilt owl statue perched on top of the clock had thrust its head out and dropped a wing over the face of the clock. Clara stared as the clock started to strike the hour. Could it be? The owl seemed to melt away, and there was Godfather Drosselmeyer sitting on top of the clock, looking quite angry, his long coattails flapping. "Godfather, it cannot be you. What are you doing there? You gave me such a scare. Come down, please." But her godfather did not answer. Suddenly, Clara heard a shrill squeaking and the sound of tiny feet scurrying, while thousands of pinpoints of lights glittered out through the cracks in the wall. What can those lights be? They look like tiny candles. No, they're mouse eyes. For indeed, everywhere mice were peeping and squeezing themselves out through the cracks all around the room, their eyes glittering and shining. Clara wasn't the least bit frightened of mice, but she leaned back against the toy cupboard as the mice scampered here and there around the room. Then, to her amazement, the Christmas tree began to grow taller and taller, glowing and shimmering with lights. The sofa, the table, the chairs were getting larger and larger. Even the doll's bed and Nutcracker in it were becoming nearly life-sized. What is happening? Everything is growing larger
and larger? Or could it be I am getting smaller?
Now the room was in a great commotion, with the big mice lining up in rows and marching towards Clara. At their head was the Mouse King. What a odd-looking sight he was. On his head he wore a strange headdress of 7 mouse heads, each with a golden crown.
Forward march!
He hissed as an army of hundreds of mice advanced slowly and steadily up to the toy cupboard where Clara crouched. Frightened, she leaned back, pressing against the cupboard door. Suddenly there was a crack of glass as her elbow pushed through the door. From inside the cupboard came another noise. A bugle sounded. It was the toys' call to arms. And then, out of the cupboard door, bravely marched a troop of proud wooden soldiers, heads held high, bayonets drawn. Bravely leading them into battle, marched the Nutcracker in his red trousers, blue coat, and plumed headdress, with his eyes fixed steadily on the fierce king of the mice. Drums beat, trumpets blared, rifles and artillery rang out. Boom, boom, boom went the toy cannons, shooting out brightly colored gumdrops. But there were only a handful of toy soldiers, and more mice kept appearing. Clara watched, horrified. It seemed the brave toy army would be defeated. Nutcracker, badly battered, was in the center of the room, directly in the Mouse King's path. What a furious fight! Nutcracker with his long, strong sword, and Mouse King with an evil-looking black and rusty club. Nutcracker looked tired as the Mouse King hit him over and over with his ugly club. How much longer could Nutcracker keep up under such a battering? What could she do to help? Nutcracker staggered back one step. The terrible club kept hitting him till it looked as if he would suddenly crack in two. Clara picked up her shoe and threw it as hard as she could, directly at the king of the mice. Enraged, the Mouse King turned around and faced Clara. This was just what she had wanted, for at once Nutcracker came up behind his enemy and struck his sword deep in the monstrous king. The horde of mice, who thought nobody could defeat their king, slowly and sadly gathered around their fallen hero, who no longer looked fierce. Picking him up, they scampered across the floor, and where they went is a mystery, for they vanished forever and ever. Poor Nutcracker had fainted and lay pale and weak on the floor.
Oh, Nutcracker, please open your eyes. Please tell me you're all right,
said Clara. And as she bent over him, he gazed up at her and slowly stood up. Clara's eyes widened with shock, for lo and behold, he was no longer a funny-looking little wooden man. There stood a handsome youth with bright blonde hair and a flaming red cape flung over his shoulder. Only his eyes had not changed. They were as deep and round and confident as before.
But who are you? Where is little Nutcracker? What has happened?
Said Clara with bewilderment. What does it all mean? It means, said the young man, that the spell has been broken. My real name is Prince Nikita. I was a spoiled young man. I had health and friends and work to do, but I was discontented and complaining all the time. An enchantress took away the power of speech and turned me into a nutcracker so that my mouth would no longer whine, but would serve some useful purpose. The enchantment would last until someone should believe that I had a heart under my fancy costume. It was you, Clara, who broke the enchantment.
Now what shall you do?
Asked Clara. I would like to show you the land I came from. It is only a few steps away. Come with me. As they were talking, the window blew open. The handsome prince stepped out the tall French window into the night. As Clara was about to follow him, the Nutcracker bed began to move like a sleigh towards the window. Clara tucked the blanket around her, but although a light snow was falling, she was quite warm. Without a sound, the bed glided on into a deep, mysterious forest. Snowflakes whirling and dancing through the air surrounded them as they traveled on. Silently, the sleigh moved through the frozen forest. Nutcracker strode on ahead, his red cloak like a torch in the hushed whiteness. It was no longer night, but it was still snowing. Big, fat flakes that circled around the bed and came rushing toward it in a great throng at every new turn in the path. Small snow fairies soared through the air and danced among the trees of the forest. They shone with a silvery glow, and on their heads tiaras of snowflakes glittered like diamonds. High on a hill with the snowflakes dancing gently around them stood the king and queen of snowflakes to greet Clara and Nutcracker. "Welcome, welcome to our kingdom," said the king of the snowflakes, holding out his hand in greeting. "You have come to the kingdom of sweets. We hope you will be happy here." Clara stared in amazement, for suddenly the snow had disappeared. "Oh, look, Prince," she called out to Nutcracker. "The bed has become a little boat. Come ride with me." For indeed, the sleigh bed was now floating down a little canal of water bordered with green plants and flowers. Far off in the distance, a castle seemed to rise out of the water. It shone like a giant birthday cake with walls of sugar icing and peppermint stripes on its tall towers. In the gardens around it, the lollipop trees bloomed, and the sweet scent of gumdrop flowers and taffy butterflies filled the air. The boat floated under an archway of golden taffy into the great hall of the castle. "Welcome, Clara and Prince Nikita," said a beautiful lady dressed in gleaming white satin. "I am the Sugar Plum Fairy, and this is the Rock Candy Hall. Now take these seats, and we will serve you with food and drink and dancing to entertain you." Clara and Nikita were glad to hear these words, for they were very hungry after their battle with the mice and their trip through the forest. And the food was delicious, better than any ice cream or birthday cake Clara had ever tasted. While they sat eating these wonderful refreshments, the entertainment began. "The first dancers are the chocolates," said the Sugar Plum Fairy. "They are doing a Spanish dance because our chocolate comes from Spain." Then a stern-looking Arab did a slow and rather sleepy dance. "And we call this dance coffee," explained the Sugar Plum Fairy, "for the Arabs are great coffee drinkers." To the odd sound of elfin bells and reed pipes, two Chinese girls brought in a big box of bamboo, like a tea chest. Out of it suddenly jumped two Oriental acrobats. Around and around the candy hall, they turned cartwheels and flip-flops. "I guess this dance is called the tea dance, because I know the Chinese drink a lot of tea," said Clara, who had studied all about China in school. The next dance was the most exciting of all. Several young men dressed in red and white stripes and carrying hoops danced with great speed, flying through the air with their whirling hoops. "Clowns! Clowns! How I love clowns!" said Clara, clapping her hands in delight as a group of tumbling clowns came dancing in next. With a whirl of motion, the hall filled with glorious flowers in full bloom, waltzing joyously round and round. Prince, said the sugar plum fairy, now you must dance with me. And off the two floated, light and delicate as a soft summer breeze. As Sugar Plum and her handsome partner finished the dance, Clara saw everybody in the Kingdom of Sweets gathered in the hall, and could they be? Were they waving goodbye? What was happening? For the light was beginning to change. Clara opened her eyes wide in astonishment. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. But here she was in her very own bed, in her very own room. The early morning cold white sunlight streamed through the window. An icicle glittered outside the window pane, and the sky was a sharp, clear blue. Snow was blowing off the rooftops, and there was a faint smell of coffee and toast. Then she saw Nutcracker, who was lying in her doll's bed. Clara stared at him. He seemed to be looking at her and smiling. The door to her room opened, and Mother came bustling into her room with a tray. "Oh, Clara, how late you've slept. I guess it was such a busy evening you're all tired out. But now it's Christmas morning, and what a lovely day it is. The storm is over, and the whole world is clean and shiny. For a special treat, I brought you breakfast in bed." "Mother, thank you for breakfast. What a wonderful party it was, the best ever. I was so excited I don't remember bringing Nutcracker upstairs." "No, darling, you didn't. He was lying on the floor in the parlor. I brought him upstairs to your room, and also one of your slippers. What a mess the parlor was in. Gumdrops and toy soldiers all over the floor." Clara opened her mouth to tell her mother about the gumdrop cannons and the evil Mouse King and the brave Nutcracker, and then she thought, "Oh, no, a grown-up could never understand. Only children will believe that it really happened." And, of course, you know it really did happen. The Night Before Christmas by Clement Clark Moore. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mama in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap, when out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from the bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters, and threw up the sash. The moon, on the breast of the new fallen snow, gave a luster of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear? A tiny reindeer, with a little old driver, so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be Saint Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall. Now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky, so up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with a sleigh full of toys and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur, from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all covered with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled. His dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke, it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work and filled all the stockings. Then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night."
We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
The Elves and the Shoemaker. Long ago, shoemakers made all the shoes. They bought the leather, cut out the shapes, and stitched them all by hand. There was once a shoemaker who, through no fault of his own, had become so poor that at last he had only leather enough for one pair of shoes, which he intended to begin sewing together the next morning. He and his wife ate their meager supper, said their prayers, and lay down quietly to go to sleep. In the morning, after drinking his tea, he prepared to sit down to work. He went to his work table, and there he found the pair of shoes standing finished. He was amazed. He couldn't understand it in the least. He took the shoes in hand to examine them more closely. They were so neatly sewn that not a stitch was out of place. They were as good as the work of a master hand. Soon afterwards, a customer came in and was very pleased with these shoes. He was willing to pay more than the ordinary price for them. So the shoemaker was able to buy leather for 2 pairs of shoes with the money, and a piece of meat for supper as well. He cut out the leather in the evening as before, and the next day again came to his work table to begin, but had no need to, for again the shoes were finished, and absolutely perfect they were. More customers came in, and again he sold the shoes quickly and bought leather for 4 pairs of shoes. Early the next morning, he saw the 4 pairs finished, and so it went. What he cut out in the evening was finished in the morning. He always sold them all, so soon again there was money in the house. They had more than enough to eat and were becoming quite prosperous. Now, it happened one evening not long before Christmas, when he had cut out some shoes as usual. He said to his wife, "How would it be if we were to sit up tonight and see who it is that helps us so much?" "Oh, what a good idea," she said. And they lighted a candle and hid themselves in a corner of the room behind some clothes which were hanging there. At midnight, there came 2 tiny little naked men who sat down at the shoemaker's table, took up the leather, and began with tiny fingers to stitch, sew, and hammer neatly and quickly, singing while they worked.
We tap, 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 and rap, 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 all the dark night through. We tap, 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 and rap, 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 to make a perfect shoe.
The shoemaker and his wife could hardly believe their eyes. The little workers didn't stop until just before dawn, when everything was all finished. Then they put everything neatly on the table and skipped quickly out the door. The next day, the shoemaker's wife said, "You know, I've been thinking, those little men have made us rich, and Christmas is coming. We ought to show them how grateful we are. They've been running around with nothing on. They must be freezing with the cold. I will make them little shirts, vests, and coats. I will knit them some stockings, and you shall make each of them a pair of shoes." "Yes, yes," he agreed. "That's a very good idea." And in the evening, when they had everything ready, they laid out the presents on the table, and they hid themselves again to see how the little men would behave. At midnight, the little men came skipping in and were about ready to set to work. But instead of the leather, they found the clothes. At first, they were surprised and then delighted. But never having worn clothes before, they had some difficulty figuring out how to put them on. They put their arms in the trousers and put the vests upside down. But finally, helping each other with glee and laughter, they succeeded, and everything fit perfectly. Then they hopped and they danced around and they leapt over chairs and tables, singing.
We tap, 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 and rap, 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 all the dark night through. We tap, 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 and rap, 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 to make a perfect shoe. We tap, 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 and rap, 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 all the dark night through. But now our job is through.
And they skipped out the door, leaving the shoemaker and his wife astonished but happy. They came back no more, but the shoemaker and his wife fared well as long as they lived, and they had good luck in everything they did.
A Baker's Dozen. One snowy Christmas Eve, a long time ago, in a small village, a baker was working late in his shop. He was selling his famous St. Nicholas cookies that people came to the village from far distant towns to buy. He was just about to close the shop when a very ugly old woman rushed into the shop.
"Look sharp now,"
She said,
"I must have a dozen of your special Christmas cookies."
The baker handed her a bag, and she looked into it and said to him,
"This is not a dozen. One more cookie. I said I wanted a dozen."
"You have a dozen. I carefully counted 12 of my finest cookies. Everybody knows that a dozen means 12, and I have given you 12.
"Come now.
Demanded the old woman.
One more than 12 makes a dozen."
The baker grabbed her by the shoulder and pushed her to the door. "A dozen is a dozen, and a dozen is 12. You may go look for another cookie elsewhere. You won't get it here." Later, when he told the story to his wife, she said, "Well,
After all, it was Christmas Eve. Perhaps on that one special night, you should give people an extra cookie.
Are you being silly, woman? After all, business is business. In the months that followed, mysterious bad luck came to the bakery. Money and cookies disappeared magically. Bread rose up to the ceiling or fell as flat as a pancake. A new brick oven collapsed. The stubborn baker began to wonder if someone had put a curse upon him. A year passed, and the baker's luck got worse and worse. On the next Christmas Eve, the baker remembered the old woman.
Holy St. Nicholas, suppose that witch comes again, he said to himself. Whatever shall I do?
As the baker spoke these words, there appeared before him that good saint, smiling with holiday kindness. Well, baker, said St. Nicholas, you were thinking my name, so here I am. All your troubles will disappear if you have the spirit of this holiday. And then the figure of the saint vanished. In its place stood the ugly old woman.
Let me have a dozen cookies, baker.
The baker rapidly counted 13 of them, put them in a bag, and presented them to her with a bow, saying, Merry Christmas, Mother. Enjoy the cookies.
The spell is broken, baker. You will no longer have bad luck. Now make a pledge to me that forever after, 13 will make a baker's dozen.
The baker took the oath, and from that day to this, a baker's dozen means 13. Brer Rabbit's Christmas. One winter morning, when Brer Fox was wandering around, he looked over at Brer Rabbit's house. Looks as if Brer Rabbit isn't home. Think I'll help myself to some of those juicy carrots in his garden. And he stole over the fence and took every last one of Brer Rabbit's carrots. When Brer Rabbit got home and saw his garden with nothing much left in it, he was mighty angry. He ran off directly to Brer Fox's house. The door was bolted and the curtain was drawn. Brer Rabbit couldn't hear a sound except his own stomach grumbling.
I smell some delicious soup cooking. Somebody must be home.
And he knocked on the door. Bang, bang, bang. But there was no answer.
You open this door, Brer Fox. I know you're in there.
And he banged even harder. No answer.
And not only that, I know those are my carrots in your soup, and I want them back this very minute. So just you open that door.
Finally, there was an answer from inside. Too bad for you, said Brer Fox. I'm never opening this door. I'm making enough soup here to last me until next year. Brer Rabbit was so angry, he kicked the door. It didn't budge. He hammered on the door. It didn't budge. Finally, he gave up. Now, Brer Rabbit was the best at trickery, and when he was mad, you had better watch out. But he could never stay mad for any long time. And the next thing you know, he was laughing because he had thought of a great plan to get his carrots back and make Brer Fox mad, too. On Christmas Eve, Brer Rabbit heaved a sack full of stones on his shoulder and climbed upon Brer Fox's roof. He clattered around, making plenty of noise. "Who's up there?" called Brer Fox.
It's Santa Claus,
Said Brer Rabbit in his made-up voice.
and I have a big bag of presents just for you.
"That's great," said Brer Fox. "You are certainly very welcome to my humble home. But aren't you supposed to come down the chimney?"
Sure I am, but I got a problem. I'm stuck in the chimney. You want to see?
Brer Fox unbolted the door and peered outside. "Well, maybe you don't have to come down. Just drop the presents down the chimney and I'll catch them."
Wish I could, but the sack is stuck too. If you would do what I say, I sure would be mighty grateful. Climb up into the chimney, then catch hold of this piece of string and pull the sack down yourself.
Brer Fox was only too eager to help.
That's easy, he said. Here I come up the chimney.
He started clawing and scrabbling his way up. Like lightning, Brer Rabbit jumped off the roof and into the doorway. There were his carrots in a pile, and on the stove was a big old pot of soup, all bubbly, and on the table were some biscuits and mince pie and a big fat Christmas pudding. Brer Rabbit could hear his stomach grumbling, and he felt his mouth watering at the sight of all that delicious food. But he didn't waste much time looking. He grabbed as much as he could, stuffed it into his sack, and took off running. Meantime, Brer Fox was struggling to get up the chimney. He couldn't see any string, but he felt it hanging down. So he gave a hard pull. The sack opened, and out tumbled all the stones right on Brer Fox's head. He went down the chimney fast. Brer Rabbit laughed all day long at how he had taken care of Brer Fox. But he did keep out of Brer Fox's way all that Christmas Day and for some time afterward.
The Fir Tree. Deep in the forest stood a lovely little evergreen tree, a fir tree. He had a nice place. The sun shone on him there. There was plenty of good fresh air, and all around him were his friends, large pines as well as other fir trees, big and small. But the little fir tree wanted so badly to be a grown-up tree. He never gave a thought to the warm sun and to the fresh air. He just took it all for granted. Even when children came and had picnics in the woods and sat down near him and said, "Oh, what a pretty little fir tree," he wasn't happy. That's not what he wanted to hear. In the fall, the woodcutters came and cut down some of the larger trees. It happened every year. And the young fir tree, who was now a fair size, trembled at the sight. The great trees fell to the earth with noise and cracking. Their branches were lopped off, and the trees looked long and bare. And then they were put in carts, and horses dragged them away. Where did they go? What became of them? "Be happy, said the sunbeams, and the wind kissed the tree, and the dew wept tears on it. But the tree didn't understand. When Christmas time came, many trees were cut down, some not even as old or as large as the fir tree. They were carted off with all their branches. Horses drew them out of the woods. "Where are they going?" asked the fir tree. "They're no bigger than I." We know, said the swallows. "We have seen it in the town. We looked through the windows and saw them planted in warm rooms and covered with splendid things, shining apples, gingerbread, and many hundred lights." "And then? What happens then?" said the tree. "We didn't see any more," said the swallows. "Oh, I wonder if that will happen to me. Oh, how I long for Christmas. I am now tall, and my branches spread like those that were chosen last year. Oh, how I wish I were on that cart. How I long to be in that warm room with all that beauty and splendor. Oh, how I suffer." Be happy, said the air and the sunlight. "Be happy that you are so young and straight and tall." But the tree was not happy. He grew and grew and was green both summer and winter. People that saw him said, "What a fine tree." And then the time came. Towards Christmas, one year, he was one of the first that was cut down. The axe struck deep into him. He fell to the earth with a sigh. And now he knew he'd never see his friends again, the little bushes and flowers around him, and perhaps not even the birds. And then he felt himself being unloaded into a courtyard with other trees, and he heard a man say, "That one is splendid. We don't want the others." 2 servants in velvet clothes came and carried the fir tree into a large and splendid living room. And the fir tree was stuck upright in a container filled with sand, with green cloth draped around its bottom, and it stood on a beautiful carpet. Oh, how the tree quivered! What was to happen? Servants decorated it. There were little nets cut out of colored paper filled with sugar candy and lights and golden apples. And at the very top, a large gold tinsel star was fixed. It was splendid beyond description. Splendid. Suddenly, the folding doors opened, and a troop of children rushed in. Older persons followed quietly. And then the children shouted and danced around the tree, and one present after another was pulled from the tree. And after they had pulled off all the sweets and presents, they forgot about the tree. "A story, a story!" cried the children to a little fat man. He seated himself under the tree and said, "Now we are in the shade, and the tree can listen too. But I shall tell you only one story. Tell us about Clumpity Dumpity, who tumbled down the stairs and yet got the throne and married the princess." And the man told that story, and the children clapped their hands and cried out, "More, more!" But the man only told about Clumpity Dumpity, who fell down the stairs and married the princess even so. The fir tree stood quite still and thought, "Ah, that is the way of the world." He looked forward with joy to the next day, when he hoped again to be decked out with candies and fruits and playthings and tinsel. "Tomorrow I shall hear again the story of Clumpity Dumpity." And the whole night the tree stood still and in deep thought. In the morning the servant and a housemaid came in. "Now it will begin again," thought the fir. But they dragged him out of the room and up the stairs into the attic, and in a dark corner where no light came in, they left him. "'Tis now winter outside," thought the tree. "The earth is hard and covered with snow. I guess they're keeping me here until spring, when they can plant me again. But it's so lonely here." Finally, one day, a little mouse appeared, and then another came out of its hole. They sniffed around the fir tree and rustled among the branches, and then they started to ask him questions. "Where do you come from? What can you do? What is the most beautiful spot on earth? Have you ever been in the pantry and seen all the cheeses?" They were very curious mice. "I don't know the pantry," said the tree, "but I know a place in the woods where the sun shines and the little birds sing." And then he told them about his youth, and then about the Christmas Eve when he was all decked out with lovely things. The mice liked his story so well that they called 4 other little mice and asked the tree to tell again and again about his youth in the woods and all those happy times. And when they asked for more, he told them about Clumpity Dumpity, every single word of it, and more mice came the next night, and he told them again, and then 2 rats came, but they didn't like the story so much. And then soon the mice tired of the same stories and asked for ones about cheese and bacon. "I don't know them," said the tree. "Then goodbye," said the rats, and the mice left too. And finally, one morning, some people came to the attic and set to work. They moved old boxes, and they pulled the tree out, and they threw it down on the floor, and a man drew him towards the stairs, where the daylight shone. "Ah," thought the tree, "a merry life will begin once more." The golden tinsel star was still on top of the tree and glittered in the sunshine. In the courtyard, some of the merry children were playing who had danced at Christmas around the fir tree. One of the youngest ran and tore off the golden star. "Look what's still on top of that ugly old Christmas tree," he said. And he trampled on the branches so that they all cracked beneath his feet. And the tree saw himself, with his leaves all dry and yellow, and he wished he had been left in the corner of the attic. He thought of his youth in the forest, of that merry Christmas Eve, and of the little mice who had listened with so much pleasure to the story of Clumpity Dumpity. "'Tis over, 'tis past," said the poor tree. "I wish I had realized it all when I was young in the woods. But now it's over." And the gardener chopped the tree into small pieces, and then they were piled under a large copper pot and set fire to, and the pieces of the tree sighed deeply as they burned. The children played about in the court, and the youngest wore the gold star on his vest, the star which the tree had had on the happiest evening of his life. However, that was all over now. Youth gone, tree gone, nothing left but the story.
The Little Blue Dishes. Once upon a time, there was a poor woodcutter who lived with his wife and 3 children in a little cabin in the forest. There was a big boy named John, and a little boy named Peter, and a dear little girl named Gretchen, just 5 years old. Christmas was coming, and the children went to the village toy shop to look at all the toys. There were tops and balls and blocks. There were woolly bears and other stuffed animals, and also animals made of wood. There were all kinds of dolls, and there was furniture for dollhouses and many other things.
"Gretchen," said Peter, "what do you like best?"
Oh, that little box of blue dishes,
said Gretchen.
"That is the best of all."
She could not take her eyes off the cunning teapot, the sugar bowl and cream pitcher, and the 2 little cups and saucers. On Christmas Eve, the children hung up their stockings, although their mother had told them they must not expect much this year. After supper, John ran out to play with the big boys. Gretchen and Peter sat by the fire talking about the toys they had seen.
"I wish I had those little blue dishes,"
said Gretchen. But soon she became sleepy and went off to bed. Peter ran to look at his bank. He found only 1 penny, but he took it and ran to the toy shop.
"What can I buy for a penny?"
he asked the toy man.
You can buy a little candy heart with a picture on it, said the man.
"But I want that set of blue dishes."
"Oh, those cost 10 cents.
"Well, then I'll take the candy heart,"
said Peter. He took it home and put it in the toe of Gretchen's stocking, and then he went to bed. Pretty soon, John came home. He was cold and hungry. While he was warming himself by the fire, he noticed the lump in Gretchen's stocking. He put in his hand and drew out the candy heart. Oh, how good this smells! And before he thought about what he was doing, he ate the candy heart.
"Oh, dear," he thought. "That was for Gretchen for Christmas. I must run and buy something else for her."
He ran to get his bank, and he found he had 10 pennies. Quickly, he ran to the toy shop. The man was just ready to close up.
"What have you for 10 pennies?"
he asked the storekeeper.
Well, I'm almost sold out, but here is a little set of blue dishes.
"I will take them."
And he ran home and put them in Gretchen's stocking. Then he went to bed. Early Christmas morning, the children jumped out of bed and came running to look at their stockings.
"Oh," cried Gretchen, "look at my stocking."
She had found the blue dishes, and she was dancing for joy. But Peter could never understand how his candy heart changed into a box of blue dishes.